All right. What we're going to be talking about today is detecting application anomalies with telemetry. My name is Jason Hand. Thank you so much for coming to this session. I'm one of the cloud advocates with Microsoft, fairly new to the team. Actually, I keep saying that, and it's been about 6 months now, but it still feels pretty new. And I've been brought on to sort of help out sort of the Microsoft Ignite the Tour team with sharing a lot of SRE principles and some of the more modern thinking when it comes to monitoring and sort of keeping applications healthy and running. And there's some different viewpoints on how you do that these days, especially around site reliability engineering, a lot of the conversations that have come out of DevOps, if you're familiar with that term. There's just kind of some new ways that we look at stuff when it comes to keeping our services up and running. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of that today. There's a lot to cover, so I'm going to get right to it. Before we sort of get things kind of kicked off within the portal and showing you some different demos, I kind of wanted to set the stage here and tell a little story, see if we can all kind of get on the same page. So let's kick things off with this. Something hopefully a lot of you relate to, although as I was coming to the venue today, I realized this is probably the worst city in the world to use this metaphor because there's so many people that ride bicycles all over the place. But how many of you have a car that you use on some sort of regular basis? Yeah, okay, that's actually quite a few of you. So there's a reason why we use these vehicles, right? They have some sort of value that they provide to us. They take us to work, they take us to the grocery store, they take us to just run errands, they take us to jobs, they take us to all kinds of things. We're taking our kids to school. That's why we use these vehicles. There's value in the vehicle. And the vehicle is itself that. It is a vehicle for the value that we are trying to obtain. Of course, there's value in the car or the truck or whatever you have, but for us, the reason why we have any vehicle at all is to get from one place to another. So that's the value that we're looking for. Now, if we kind of upscale this a little bit and we start talking about buses, it's the same thing, right? It's still trying to get us from point A to point B. It's similar concept, just trying to move around, go run errands, get to school, get to work, whatever the case may be. But there's a little bit more going on now. We got more passengers on the bus. And it's still just this one single provider. It's just the one bus that's trying to get us there. How many of you that have cars, that raise your hand, how many of you have ever run out of gas at some point in your life? Probably earlier when you were younger. I feel like it happens to most of us at some point. We think we can push it just a little bit further. I know that gauge can get down to right about there before I need to fill up. So it's happened to a lot of us, and it's pretty frustrating. It's something that's aggravating. It's a little bit inconvenient, but at the end of the day, that's just something that kind of happens. But however, a car that's pulled over to the side of the road because it's run out of gas no longer has value. It can't get us to our job. It can't get us to the store. It can't help us take our kids to school. So suddenly that value, all of the things that all of these really smart engineers and people on the manufacturing floor put all their energy into to create something that gave us value, we let it just sort of die on the side of the road because we weren't paying attention to the health of the system. Really, in this case, just the fuel, what's going on with the system. So for a car, there's recipient. The recipient of that value is usually just me, maybe another passenger or two in my car. It's a small thing. But when you're talking about a bus, something goes wrong there. Suddenly, we've got a lot more people who are complaining. We've got a lot more people who aren't getting that value. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never actually been on a bus that's run out of gas. I feel like they kind of realize, hey, it's not just the driver that's trying to get someplace. It's all these other 50 passengers or whoever else is on the bus that are trying to get, again, to a job interview or just something super important. They rely on that bus, and that's the key word there. They're relying on it. It's something that's reliable transportation for them. But that's still the value that they're going after. It's getting me from one place to another. So what's all this talk of value have to do with tailwind traders? How many of you have already heard the story of tailwind traders? It's kind of part of the theme of a lot of these talks. We've got this new company out here. It's a new modern cloud era company, and they're just like any other company, and they're probably just like a lot of you. It's just something that we have to deal with now. We all agree, we all know that no matter what industry you're in, no matter what company you are in, no matter what you're building, we're all developing applications and digital services for either external customers, internal customers. I mean, I'm assuming that's why you're all here, at least in why you're here in this talk, is that you're now looking at Azure, or maybe you're already on Azure, but regardless, you're building something for other people to use. And that's where that value, again, kind of comes back around. What is it that they need to do, and what are you doing to provide that? How are you building that for them? And a major challenge that we face as we move things to the cloud is how do we monitor this stuff? It's different now in the cloud than it used to be when we were monitoring, our own servers in our own closets, or maybe on our own in our own data centers. We could just walk right up to the server and we can swap things out if something goes wrong. But now that we're in the cloud, things work just a little bit different. There's all kinds of resources that we can go get, virtual resources. We can grab things dynamically. We can set up scripts that'll just go take care of stuff for us. Things are just different. But it's still a challenge to try to keep our systems and our services running so that, again, it's providing that value to the other parties. So let's shift our perspective to that other party, away from the company that's providing the service, and actually talk a moment about the users, about the people who are using our apps, who are using the different things that we're building. What value are they getting out of that service? What are they trying to accomplish? And to understand that, we want to find a different way, or at least a better way, a new way, to sort of understand more about what our users are doing, what our customers are doing, how they're doing it, if it's working well for them. Again, the value that we're trying to provide to them, is it actually being delivered? So when people ask me for advice on, what do I do for monitoring? I'm building this new system, I'm building out a new service, I'm a startup. Where should I start? Where should I put the most effort in when it comes to sitting down with my team and deciding what we need to monitor? What are the most important things? Well, in today's world, it's become a little less important to kind of focus in the areas that we used to. This is where I probably just like maybe 5 years ago even, or definitely a little bit longer than that, I would tell, let's start with the applications, let's start with the infrastructure, let's make sure we know what the CPUs are doing, and the disk space, and the network, and the memory. Those are all things that if we don't have a real good pulse on what's going with that, if something goes wrong, we're not going to catch it in time before our applications fall over and our users are going to have problems and they're going to complain. And that's still important. We do monitor for those types of things, but now, like I mentioned just a minute ago, we can set up some automation so that if we run out of resources, if we need more CPU, if we need more disk space, we can have Azure or whatever it is actually go out and get that stuff automatically for us. So we no longer have to sort of pay attention to that, be alerted to it maybe in the middle of the night, scramble to go get more resources, or if you think back even in the further back, if we ran out of resources and we needed another server, that might take weeks for me to order, get it into our facility, get it set up and configured, rack and stack, that whole thing takes a little bit of time. Now we can get more resources almost instantaneously just with a few clicks or with some sort of automation script. So we used to sort of focus a lot of our attention here, but things are different now. Now we're trying to shift our perspective and understand, again, is this ultimate value, if you look at it more holistically, is the thing that people are coming to use our services for, our applications, is that delivering on its promise? And the only way to know that is to actually look to see what the users are experiencing and what they're doing. When I say user experience, I'm not talking about UX and UI type of conversations. Obviously, that's all very important too, but what I'm really talking about is what is it like for me to go in and perform the task? I'm always talking about my bank's website. I think it's always a good example. I like to go into my bank, move money around, pay some bills. If for some reason I run into any kind of hiccup, there's a good chance that if that happens a few times, I'm going to go find another bank provider, because I don't care about the bank necessarily, and I don't care if they're on Azure. I don't care if they're running it using some sort of specific technology with Kubernetes and all these different things. I really don't care. I'm there to pay bills. That's the value that the online banking system is providing me. So how do we know if the online banking system, or whatever it is you can think of in your mind, is actually delivering on that? So if we kind of switch back to the metaphor or the story about the cars and the buses, all of those vehicles have some sort of dashboard, right? They give you a feedback, real-time feedback about not only what your speed is, but how you doing on your fuel consumption? Are you going to run out of gas soon? Maybe what your engine RPMs are. You don't want to redline those things. They'll even tell you if your doors are open or if you got low tire pressure. I mean, they've gotten a lot more advanced so that they can give you this real-time feedback so that you don't end up on the side of the road unable to deliver that value to the people that are in your vehicle, the passengers and yourself. So we use these dashboards to give us real-time information that allows us to course correct along the way. If I see that my fuel is running low, it's probably time for me to exit and go ahead and top off my gas. If I didn't have that dashboard, if I didn't have that telemetry, if I didn't have that feedback, I wouldn't know what's going on. Things would eventually just start to break. When you start thinking about the applications that we have, most well-written applications are going to have mechanisms such as logging. They're going to have things about error reporting. They're going to have all kinds of things that they collect or maybe dump off into another place so that engineers can, and at some point, maybe it's real time, maybe it's after the fact, they can understand what the internal states of a system are. And the cloud is the same way. It's actually just probably more important to instrument your software in a way that gives you the insight and gives you the understanding of the performance of all these things like CPU and like network and memory. But again, a little bit more than that, a little bit more information about what's going on kind of beyond our usual vision. So if you can stop and just think for a moment about your systems that you're building, what are you monitoring? What kind of telemetry are you trying to create for yourself in the moment, in real time, for your engineers to understand what's going on? These are the kinds of questions that I hope you're starting to ask yourself, certainly after this talk and probably a few others this week. You really need to start looking closer at the user behavior, which is a difficult thing to do. Now, if you're interested, I'm going to be giving 2 more talks tomorrow, both the SRE 20 and the SRE 30 talks. And I'm going to go into depth about some site reliability engineering concepts, and we're going to talk about service level indicators and service level objectives. And those are kind of 2 new concepts that a lot of teams are starting to explore because it changes the dynamic about monitoring, and it gives us a little bit different ways to sort of understand more about what users are really experiencing. So I'm not going to touch too much about that today because I got way too much to go over, but if you're curious about site reliability engineering and SLIs and SLOs, I encourage you to join really the entire SRE track that starts tomorrow, and hopefully you'll learn a lot of great stuff there. But we're going to talk about today, and also in those talks, is application insights. This is really sort of our tool that for a lot of SREs and a lot of people that are in the operations space, this thing, like I said, I've only been with Microsoft for about 6 months now. I came from the open source world, from the startup world, where we didn't really use a lot of Microsoft products, but I used a lot of monitoring and telemetry and graphing and just different visual type of tools that really helped us understand at any point in time what our systems were doing. Now that I've been introduced to application insights, all the same stuff is there, and it's all right out of the box. For anybody who's using Azure, if you're building your applications on Azure, all the stuff is just kind of baked in, which I think is really nice because some of these things are really powerful. One of the things that I think is super powerful that doesn't get talked about very much is this idea of smart detection. So there's a few things within application insights that I'm going to go over in depth, but I just wanted to point this one out because this one is something that I think over time, as you get more comfortable with application insights and the different things that you can do, you can start to really leverage stuff like smart detection, where it'll look for sort of differences or anomalies in the behavior of the system, behavior of the users, and actually make suggestions for you into what types of things you could be doing to either remediate the problem if there is a problem or make things better moving forward. And we'll show a little bit of a few examples on how we can make something like latency get a little bit better moving forward. But that's a way to sort of proactively look at things. We've also got different ways that I'm going to go into how we can, after the fact, after there's been some sort of outage or downtime, we can dig into what happened and what were the things that broke and see if we can try to narrow it down to a few contributing factors that really kind of came together to make this problem a real problem for us. So we'll look at the sort of reactive ways that we can get into applications in our infrastructure. And then we'll also talk about how you can see things kind of in real time, live, as they're happening. When something goes wrong, there's a few places within application insights where you can see immediately what your users are doing, what they're experiencing. So I'm going to show that off too. So one of the things, or the thing that I'm going to be showing off to sort of highlight a lot of these things is, of course, the Tailwind Traders app that we've been talking about. Tailwind Traders is just like any other sort of online retailer. They sell things, a lot of just different random stuff. The application we're going to be showing off today is sort of their inventory application. So it's sort of their back end where they can go in and say, here's how many widgets we have of this size, and here's all the number of things we have for this. And we kind of go in and adjust our inventories, and we can change our descriptions and all that kind of stuff. So that's the main application that we're going to be talking about. So this is our application here. And there's not much to it. If I scroll through here, you can see there's a safety cone. It's got its own ID. tell it where the supplier's coming from, how many we have, and I can click into any of these, and let's say I just did an audit on my inventory and I realized, no, we don't have 45, we actually have 44 of these, so I just dropped the number down one. And that's all I really need to do in this thing. So that's sort of our app, right? And as I scroll through here, I mean, it seems to work. It works as expected. If I scroll down really fast, you can kind of see over here that these icons take a second for it to query the database and pull in our inventory values there. But I mean, it's a little slow, but for the most part, it just seems to work, right? Well, that's kind of the story for a lot of us. We think it's working just fine. Systems seem to be working just normal. We can even, try to simulate some things. Of course, our QC, our QA process, like they're out there trying to simulate different failing scenarios. They're trying to test it to see if it does have problems. But inevitably, things are going to slip by. They're going to make it into production. There's going to be something that we didn't quite catch. And that's kind of where application insights, or really kind of any monitoring software, is going to help you, because you're never going to catch everything. And the faster that we get with all these things, we talk about continuous integration, continuous delivery. We're really trying to get features out as quickly as possible. The problem with that is that we have to have better instrumentation to tell us what's going on with these applications in production, because we're speeding up the process of getting them out, but we still need to maintain, a reasonable amount of uptime. So we start to look at different ways that we can sort of understand this stuff. Okay, so that's a little bit of high level on what application insights can offer you. But before we can get application insights working at all, you have to actually instrument your application. You have to instrument your code and your systems to be able to collect this stuff within application insights. So I'm going to show you a little bit how we do that. There's 3 components to this application that I showed you within that browser. One is an app called our product service. This is actually a microservice that's built on Node.js. We have a front-end single-page application that's just HTML and JavaScript. And then we have an inventory service that's built with .NET Core. So I'm going to show you right now how to go in and enable application insights for all 3 of those components of this application. All right, so let me back up here and pull over my directory structure. So we can see we've got my 3 different apps here. There's a front-end, inventory service, and product service. This is just the code base for my application. Let's take a look at the product service first. This is, like I said, this is the Node.js microservice. And those of you familiar with Node, you know that we need to check and make sure that we have the package in there, the Node.js package, which we've got this one. I've highlighted it here. Application Insights is already set up and running. Once that's in there, if I go to my index.js file, you'll see there's not much to it. We just need to call, make sure we have this requirement for Application Insights for that package. And then there's just a couple lines of code right here, right below this, that is enabling application insights. And that's all there is to it. One thing I do want to point out, because I'll pop this up later on in the demo, is we can add our own tags, kind of custom tags that let us query on specific things later on. I'll show you how that works within log analytics. That'll make much more sense. But you can do a little bit of kind of customization here within the code. But as you can see, there's not much to it. So that's our front end, that's our product service application. If I look at our front end, it's just as simple. So I'm going to go into just our index.html. And we'll see down here, all it is just a JavaScript little snippet, not much going on. This instrumentation key, that's all blocked out, but you'll see within the portal where you grab the instrumentation key, we just would pop that in right there, and then suddenly this application, this JavaScript application or HTML page, it's going to start sucking in all kinds of great information for us too. That's all it took for me to get that front part of the application running. And then when it comes to our inventory service, I actually don't have to do anything within the code base at all. Any application that's written on .NET Core, all I need to do is actually come in and find the application. So I'm going to go into my resource group. And if I go into my inventory service application, over here on the left, if I scroll down far enough, we'll find Application Insights. Now, I've already got it enabled so that it was collecting data earlier when I was kind of exercising the application. But it's as simple as just coming in and turning on this Enable option. And that's all you had to do for .NET Core, and suddenly it's scraping all kinds of really, really awesome information that we can then look at in a ton of different dashboards. We can go and run some log analysis on it. But it's that simple. So you can see really quickly with just kind of 3 components to this application, we can instrument our overall service to suddenly be providing all kinds of really useful information into application insights that will help us not only diagnose and troubleshoot in the moment when something's going on, but really give us a lot of information that we can report on. We can share that up to our product teams, and we can say, hey, this is how much usage we're getting on this, and here's sort of the path that people come into our app and then navigate through and then exit. All that information is available through application insights. And so it's not always just for your operations and your system administrators and your sort of IT groups. There's a lot of great information that can be surfaced up to even leadership for them to make real business value decisions and see what they can do to sort of improve the service in a non-technical way, or at least in a sort of a higher level decision-making way. And that's really all there is to sort of enabling application insights from the get-go. So there's not much to it. It's pretty simple. But like I said earlier, even though our system looks to be working fine, sometimes there's something that we missed, something that slipped through, something we didn't think to check when it comes to QC. So we're back in our same app here. I'm going to just refresh the page real quick so we can get do a real quick fresh query. You can see it's out there looking at our inventory. It pulled it back in here. And if I scroll through here, let's say I do it kind of fast, you can see that these icons do take a little bit of time to load up. I don't know, maybe that's not a problem, but as someone who has some ownership in this application, it's not up to my standards. I don't like it for it to spin the little icon for a couple of seconds. Maybe it's okay for the first few times you use the app, but eventually you're going to be like, yeah, that's a little too slow. I'm going to go find a different provider who has less latency in the system. So we can tell, I think all of us in the room know that what's happening here is it's querying the database, it's trying to get those inventory values, and it's just taking a little bit longer. So how do we verify that it is like a latency thing, or where do we look to see what in the world's going on? Well, the first place that I like to look is what's called an application map. So within application insights, if you're in, let me kind of back up and just go into resource group here. And if I go into my main application insights instance, over here on the left, we've got application map. Now, what I showed you is I started creating a dashboard where I can just put any of these things that I navigate to all in a single place, which is just like our dashboard in our vehicle. It's just the things that I really care about. So if I know that application map's going to be super helpful to me in any given moment, I'll go ahead and add this to my dashboard just by going in and clicking the little pin thing. So if I go into application insights and then application map, and then I hit this pin over here, suddenly it's going to show up on my dashboard, which is really handy, really saves a lot of time. So anyway, let's go into the application map and see if we can understand what may be going on with this latency. So if we zoom this out here, we can start to see, I'm going to change the time frame here and just look at it maybe within the last 30 days. But we can start to see how our services, or those three different microservices, kind of exist in the same environment, and if they talk to each other, or how they talk to each other, and what kind of latency are we seeing between things. So we can see over here, between our inventory service and the backend SQL over here, yeah, there's a few calls in here that we may want to look at. I see some red. Red usually indicates something problematic. We should probably look at that. I can see that there's been over 2.4 thousand calls. The latency is about 51.7 milliseconds. That's not terrible, but it's not great either. But over here on our product service, when it's looking at the Tailwind Traders database, it actually does have quite a bit of latency, 252 milliseconds, which maybe that's a little bit too slow for me. And if I want, I can click into any of these things, and it'll tell me even more information. So I can go over here and I can see that the average duration for it to run that search, run that find out of the database, is taking 252 milliseconds, which I think is probably too slow for me. Or at least I want to see if I can make that a little bit better. And there's lots of different things that we can do from here, and I'm going to be showing multiple ways to kind of get to the same information, but you can always dig deeper. There's always another option to sort of take you into another place within Application Insights to find out even more information. Well, I think we can all kind of agree that at looking at this application map, that yes, there is some latency in that request to the database. I wonder what we can do to speed that up. Let me go back to the resource group here, and I want to see, feel free to raise your hand if you spot it. Does anybody see maybe a possible reason why there might be some latency between an app and a database. Yes, it's the regions. Now, for whatever reason, we put this database in Australia. Maybe the developers are in Australia, and that's where they developed it for their own latency issues. Doesn't matter, I don't really care, because I have ways I can move data around. Just because it's in one region of the world doesn't mean it's locked there, especially if we're using something like Cosmos. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Azure Cosmos, which is the database that we're using for the back end here. And what's cool is it's going to come up and show you this nice little map, and I can kind of zoom in a little bit. And you can see, yeah, here's our data. It's down here in Australia. And there's lots of other areas around the world that we could have put that data. Like I said, I don't know why. Our developers probably decided it needed to be down in I think that's Melbourne maybe, but it needs to be in Australia, okay? But that's not going to cut it. I need to find a way to get this service running a little faster. So what I'm going to do is actually go into the map just by clicking on it, and I'll zoom in again over here so we can see sort of the world view. And what I'm going to do, I remembered that my application is actually running in central US, or it's running in some sort of one of the US data centers over here. So what I'm going to do is actually replicate the data that's existing in Australia right now to a different data center. I'm going to put it closer to the application. So what I'll do is actually, I can just pick any of these by hovering over. I'm going to go with the central US. And if I click that, zoom back out and hit save, what it's doing right now is just taking that exact same data that's in my Australian location and moving it, replicating it to the central US. So really quickly, with just like 4 or 5 clicks, now I've moved my data closer to the applications, so that those using the applications that are running in the central US are now going to be pulling from the data that's actually running, that's actually stored in, I think this is like the Chicago area. So that's one option to sort of make things a little bit faster. Another option that we could do too, so that was moving data closer to the application, but another option is actually moving the application, or at least the traffic that's hitting that application, move that closer to the data. So another option we could do here is, I've already put in a search here just to sort of speed things up, but we look for our traffic manager profile, which is just a resource. So if you went to create resource, you'd see this screen here where you have all the different resources you can pick. I went with traffic manager profile. I hit create, and then over here on the traffic manager sort of input screens, I gave it a name. I said, we're going with the routing method of geographic. There's a couple different things you can do here, but we want to make this more of a geographic type of logic, like where are the people coming from and which data should we serve them. So we go with geographic. I've got my subscription that I'm running all this stuff off of, and the resource group that all these things are related to. So I'll hit create. And this will take a moment for it to sort of spin up and get its things going. But what I said, like I said, what we're trying to do now is kind of the opposite approach, where we're going to take people as they hit our application and make a logical decision. Should we send them to the Australian data or should we send them to the other data? So that's what's happening here. It's in progress. We'll give it another second. But if it takes too much longer, we'll just kind of move on to the next thing. Never know with conference Wi-Fi is how fast these things are going to move. One thing that is kind of cool is it does tell you, kind of gives you an indication, if I can highlight correctly, what's going on, how long it's taken these things to run. So you can kind of come in here and watch that. Just for the sake of time, let's just come back and check on that in a little bit. So that's a little bit about the application map, how we can go in and real quickly, you can see that just with a quick scan of the screen, yeah, the latency between our database and our application was just too much. So it was pretty easy to spot what was going on there. Then we came in here and we showed you the application map. We showed you we can move the data closer to the app, and then also how to move the app and the user's experience closer to the data. Now, a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about today in terms of application insights, we're just barely scratching the surface of what you can do within this sort of product within Azure. So I really encourage you to, when you have some time, to go check out the links. There's a couple of them I'll be sharing with you. But go check this out. Dive into the documentation. There's so many awesome things that you can do with application insights, and they're adding new functionality and features. It seems like every week I'm getting emails from different product teams talking about the things that they're coming, the things that they've added, asking me for input and advice and how we can share all the amazing things they're doing. So go check out this doc, but also go check out this one about Traffic Manager, especially since I really just kind of breezed over that as it was taking a little bit too long. The Traffic Manager has a lot of different things that you can do. I showed you the geographic method, but there's a lot of different things. It's almost like it's like a load balancer, but it has some logic behind it. It decides where things should be routed, where the traffic should be routed. So how many of you have seen something like this? You go to this actually is a screenshot. I blanked out the address, but I was trying to go to Brazil for the stop on the tour, and I was trying to get my visa, and this suddenly popped up. And it didn't really tell me much, didn't really know what to do, but this is a very common thing. It's not very helpful for the end user. We just kind of give up and try again later. There's not much I can do with this, right? So how can we show off an experience like that within the Tailwind traders and see what we can actually do about it? I'm just going to pick this extension cord here, since it's already kind of a low inventory. And let's say we just did an audit, and it turns out we don't have one. We're actually at 0. We have no extension cords in inventory, so we need to reduce this down to 0, and then kind of move on. So I come in here and I hit 0 or hit negative to take it down to 0, and I'm thinking, well, this is taking too long. Maybe it's the latency. By now I'm realizing, no, it's not the latency. That shouldn't do that, right? Something is wrong. Well, as a user, how do you know what's wrong? How do you know what to do in this case? Or how do you know what to even complain about? If you want to send a message to customer support, or you want to hop on Twitter and start really frying this company, how do you know what's really going on? Well, you don't. I mean, some of us would know that you can come in here, and if I was to reproduce this, if I was to come in and inspect, and look at the console, I can see, okay, yeah, there's some problems here. We've got a 500 error. We've got an internal server error. That's not something I can do. I didn't break this. This is bad code. This is bad something on their end. So at least I can now send a support request in and say, hey, I just hit a 500 error, trying to reduce the inventory down to 0. That's pretty good information for the support team. But let's say I'm a typical user who's I don't know, I'm gonna go do something else. I'm gonna find a different, I'm fed up with this. And that information never actually gets back to your team. They never told you. Those are the types of things that we're trying to capture now, what the users aren't telling you for whatever reason, because if they are seeing this all the time, but they're not vocalizing it, they're not communicating it, we're just gonna keep on chugging along. We have no idea that there's a problem. There's something that got missed in QA, but we still have no idea that there's a problem. And the last thing you want, really, is people going on social media or even customers. The last thing you want is someone other than your own engineering team telling you that you have a problem. But that's a very common thing. We see it all the time. I see it on Twitter almost weekly, where somebody's complaining about a service, and almost always, those people have much more awareness of the problem than the actual engineers who are developing and running that stuff in production. Anyway, so that's the problem that we're experiencing here. There's definitely something wrong with the code. So how do I figure out what is wrong with the code? Well, if I go back into Azure, so we can see some things happening in here. We've got our failed requests, stuff that's going to pop up here in a moment after it renders. And we can start digging in. So if I go into the failed request section, I can see that there's definitely some problems in here. It's already starting to show me that there's 500 errors. So this is a good place to sort of come in really quickly, especially if somebody is complaining about an issue and say, oh yeah, I do see 500 errors. Let's see if we can dig in and understand what's going on. And like I mentioned, you can always come in here in multiple different ways. So I'm showing you just sort of random different ways to hit this stuff. You're going to come up with your own random different ways to get to these things. And that's why the dashboard and these pins are so helpful. For creating those dashboards like we talked about with the vehicles, I can come up here and just hit pin, and then when I come back to my dashboard, it's already there. So I can just click on failures, and I don't have to stumble through the interface like I kind of did, trying to figure out where is that thing that tells me about the failures. Oh, it's on my dashboard. I just click it, and immediately I'm in here. And so this helps me start to dig in and understand what is it with these 500 errors. And there's lots of different things we can come in and kind of explore around. These are kind of cool because when you click on them, it actually shows you a timeline of events and timeline of things. So we can see, if I move this blade over, we can see not only the duration, but we can see the two different exceptions here. We've got a divide by 0 exception. Well, that kind of makes sense. We were trying to get our inventory down to 0. There must be some math in there that's not quite right. Well, that's that's helpful. Now I've got like at least a little bit of a breadcrumb trail, a cookie trail to tell me where should I go look? What's going on here? Well, it's a divide by zero problem. Now, let me back up here and show you if I was to go into that timeline again and hit show all, we'll see not only do we have the response code, but we can see where the request came from. We can see all kinds of different information, but the real magic is down in this place. This is where my head popped off when I first saw this. So this is the entire call stack, okay, for that 500 error, for those problems. If I come in here and say, just show me my code, I can see down to the line where that problem is in my code base. So I can now go into my code and fix that divide by zero code error. And this took me like what, like a minute to figure out, when usually you get a 500 error and you really have no idea where to start in most cases. So that's super fun, that's super powerful, but that's also kind of like after the fact, right? Like maybe somebody told you, hey, I hit a 500 error, can you go investigate and see what's going on? But we're trying to find these things a little bit more quicker, or at least be proactive about it. So how can we find these types of things sort of in real time? Well, I'm going to go back into my application insights and show you over here on the left this option of live metrics stream. If I click on this, this will take a few seconds for it to sort of pull in all of its different metrics and get them rendered on the screen here. Okay. So what we have here is just sort of a live stream of what's going on within our systems and a couple different metrics. We've got a request coming in, and you can see the sort of the tracing as it's happening, what's really taking place. Now, if I come over here to this application again and see if I can reproduce the error, if I take this down to 0 and I pop back over, immediately you can see the 500 error. So it's in pretty close to real time. I mean, it didn't take me long to get over to that other tab, and immediately you can see that 500 error. So this is a great way too, again, let's go ahead and add this to the dashboard, and I can real quickly come in here and just look at the live stream. Hey, what's going on? Oh my gosh, I see a bunch of red over here in our telemetry. That can't be good. Again, I've been told red is bad. So we can come in here and look at a little bit more information. But from this point, I would probably just hop back over to the dashboard and, okay, we've got some failures, 500 errors, okay, take me right to the line of code, reach out to my developers, hey, I just found a bug, can you maybe do a quick pull request to fix this? Let's get this stuff out into production and correct it. So real quick way to see kind of after the fact, but also in real time, what's happening with your systems. Okay, so that's taking a look at sort of our historical data, as well as taking a look at things in real time to see if we can understand what in the world's happening. So we've talked a little bit about how you can see some of the exceptions and some of the, the call stack and just the basic problems. We can see user behavior, like I mentioned. You can tell where people came into your application and where they went next, and then where and when they exited. So there's all kinds of user behavior information we can look at. We can look at performance metrics. Those are all types of things that Application Insights automatically grabbing for us. And then you can also build custom metrics. And I'm going to show you that in a minute too. If you remember that code snippet where I put in the product service, sort of meta, I guess, custom tag, that allows me to run custom law or custom queries and create really like my own set of metrics that's kind of based on other stuff that's going on. But that's all really just at the surface. When it comes to Application Insights, there's so much more data that it's collecting that most of the time we wouldn't need. But the fact is, these days, storage is cheap. We really want to collect as much information as possible. That's one of the big DevOps principles. We want to measure, measure, measure. You may not need that stuff, that data all the time, but man, it sure is helpful, especially in a post-incident review, when you go back and you can say, oh, okay, here's all this data we just logged. Like, yeah, we actually had leading indicators of this problem a month ago. We just weren't really looking for it. So whatever you can measure, you should measure, log, collect all that stuff. Application Insights is just going to do it for you in a lot of cases. You're going to discover there's data in there you didn't even know you were capturing. But it's really handy once you start needing it. So you can kind of really do a much deeper dive into your data. And I like to say that the deep blue sea here of data, that's where you guys all know, Azure, the name Azure, blue, but the query language that we use to query all this data is called Cousteau. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Jacques Cousteau. So there's a little fun inside story of where that name came from. But yeah, we're going to go sort of explore the deep blue sea of data. And the way we do this is using log analytics. And if we kind of go back to the story of the vehicles, I think of log analytics a lot like our onboard diagnostics. Okay, so we have our own dashboard that's telling us, how we're doing on fuel, how we're doing on, air pressure on our tires, RPMs, all that kind of stuff. But eventually, your check engine light's going to come on. And it's not super helpful. It just tells you that something's not quite right. So at that point, you have to take it to a mechanic. You got to take it to your dealership. And all they do is just plug in this really specialized computer that can then go in and look at much deeper information. It can tell you that, hey, you've got a misfire in one part of your engine that's been happening for the last couple months. That's why you're getting really bad fuel consumption. It can tell you all kinds of stuff that the car's dashboard or the things that are provided to you can't tell you. So that's the way I look at log analytics. It's a way for us to understand sort of the deeper components and actually ask our own questions. Not just let Azure kind of serve things up for us, but actually say, hey, this is what I want to know. So I'm going to write a custom query to get that information. So let's switch back over to the portal, and I'll show you a little bit about log analytics. So if we start back again from my dashboard, I can go to my resource groups, or I can just go straight into application insights for all of these apps. And the way I do it, like I've already mentioned a couple times, there's multiple ways to get to the same place. I like to come in straight to my application insights and then click on analytics. And this takes us into our log analyzer, where we use a query language known as Cousteau. It's very similar to like the SQL query language, if you're familiar with that. It's not the same, it's different syntax, but if you've ever done any kind of work within SQL or really any database, you're probably going to pick this up pretty quickly, but there's some really great resources, and I'll share those with you as well. It hasn't taken me long to really pick this stuff up, but one of the things that's really nice, that I thought was nice anyway, when I first started coming in here, is Microsoft sort of assumes that Cousteau might be new to you, application insights might be new to you, so they make some suggested, let me see if I can move this up, some suggested queries for you right out of the box. So you can come in here and choose any of these, click on this, and what it does is automatically puts in the syntax for the query, and automatically runs it for you, and then I'll scroll down here a little bit, and then renders that data for you. So you can, without knowing anything about Cousteau, without knowing anything about log analytics, being a first-timer just coming in here and pointing and clicking and just seeing what you can figure out, you can actually understand quite a bit. If I was to refresh this again and come in and choose a different one, we'd see a different thing. And it's also going to show you your previous queries that have been ran. So in your history, you can scroll through here, and maybe you ran one yesterday, but you can't quite remember the syntax. You just come in and find that. So that's really nice for you to be able to kind of use pre-canned queries that they have. But we can also write our own queries. We can just create one from scratch, and there's a couple different ways you can do that. The first way that a lot of people do this as they're sort of learning Cousteau is you can come over and just kind of point and click and create your query on the fly. So I could come over here under the application insights. Each of these, you can kind of think of them as tables. They're just collections of data that's been scraped and been collected by application insights. So we have stuff about traces. If I expand that out, you can see that we have timestamp and severity level and lots of different things that are all tied to the category of traces. I can then come down and maybe look at requests. We've got page views, availability results. There's all kinds of stuff that's just ready to go for you to query on. And all I have to do is just start building out my query simply by just double tapping or double clicking on things. But we want to ask a very specific question. So I've got a query I've already written. It's very short, very simple. Just let me copy it for you real quick. Come on. So paste this in here, and we'll talk about it real quick. So first of all, I've just got a little comment in here that we're going to look for all exceptions within the last 24 hours by the type of exception. So we're querying the exceptions table. If I look down through here, Yeah, I don't think it's going to, yeah, there it is, the exceptions table. And then just give me the results where the timestamps are greater than 24 hours ago. I'm sorry, within the last 24 hours. And then summarize that by the type. So if I go ahead and run this, we can see that in the last 24 hours, I've had 24 of these divide by zero problems, or divide by zero errors. That's a very simple query, but yet it tells me something very helpful, very specific. And so this is the type of stuff that you can do. You can go in and find really, really simple things. And if you remember back to when we were looking at the Node.js application where I had a custom tag in there that was for product service, if I come in here now and just use cloud role name and run that, that's actually going to tell me exactly which service was having that problem. So I can see down here, this is my inventory service that's actually creating that 500 error. So this is another way that I can sort of drill into what's going on and where are these things happening. Now I kind of went the other approach. I went through failed requests and ended up finding that there was a 500 error that way, and it told me exactly which line of code. But let's say I started at log analytics. Maybe maybe I was the person who was on call, and my runbook told me to go to log analytics, run this query first. That'll tell me where to go next. So there's lots of ways that you can sort of design these things, especially for your first responder, depending on what you think is the right way to respond and remediate these problems. So you might say, come here and see if you can figure out which inventory service it is, and then go right into failed requests and look at that inventory service. That would make a lot much more sense in a larger scale environment and a bigger system. We're just talking about 3 microservices here, so this is a pretty quiet, pretty small system. In other scenarios, that type of thing, running your own custom tag, is going to help you save all kinds of time by actually pointing to where the problems are. So that's really all there is to it in terms of log analytics and writing your own queries. And there's all kinds of neat little functionality you can do over here. I can save any query that I've created, then I can pull them up real quickly. You can share them with others. We could create a new alert rule. So for those that want to be, for those who want to make sure someone is made aware of these problems, it's an on-call type of thing, we would go in and set up a new rule alert. A new alert rule, so that when we see this type of a problem, if it maybe hits, let's say we put in a service level indicator that says when the inventory service, or if the inventory service has so many 500 errors within let's say 60 minutes, we want to page somebody because that seems excessive. That's something we want to make sure there's not a problem with. So it's through this new alert rule that we would create that. So when talking about querying the system a little bit deeper, I showed you how the query analyzer itself has suggested queries, and they're usually pretty helpful. I mean, Microsoft has been doing this stuff for a long time. They've provided some templates and some examples of queries that they've found have been useful building out their system. So those are all kind of right there ready for you to use. But you can go crazy with your queries. You can create some really, really complex things. You can join different tables. You can summarize. You can create new fields on the fly. You can create calculated fields. There's so many things that you can learn, or so many things that you can do and learn about your system through log analytics. There's no possible way that I could cover everything here. I'm going to do some more diving into log analytics tomorrow with SRE 20 and SRE 30. So if that's a tool that you play with, or a tool you're really curious about, I encourage you to come check out those talks because we'll go deeper in that. But in the meantime, or if you're not able to, here's another doc that I went to initially that really helped me kind of learn about this stuff from the basics and then kind of go out from there. So I encourage you to go check that out as well. Okay, so we've talked about quite a few things in a very short amount of time here. I showed you how to instrument your applications so the application insights is just suddenly there, sucking all kinds of great data. Didn't take long. You saw like within the 3 different components of my service, only 2 of them needed some code that I needed to add in there. So pretty lightweight when it comes to adding too much. We don't like to add code into our system that doesn't really need to be there. But it didn't take much. We put those in there and then suddenly Application Insights is getting everything. The .NET Core one, I didn't have to do anything. I just went into Azure Portal, went into Application Insights, and I just flipped a switch to turn it on. So that's pretty simple. Doesn't get much easier than that. Then we showed off how do you know, or where should you go when you know something's not quite right. We started seeing that, hey, in our application, it's not bad, it's not failing necessarily when I scroll down, but it's taking a while for it to go query that database. And maybe right now I'm okay with this, 250 milliseconds latency, but eventually I'm not gonna be. So there's a couple different ways you can approach solving that problem as well. We showed how I can go in and actually just replicate our data. Let's just move it around the world. That's one of the great advantages of not only the cloud, but things like Cosmos DB, is that you can become geo-redundant. You can take your data and just put it all over the place so that you have easily accessible, quickly accessible data, which is super important, especially for those of you who are building globally distributed systems, or at least have users all around the world. You don't want them, I'm guessing in most cases, probably from Amsterdam, querying a database that's in China. Like, that's probably not the best architectural decision. So you can change that real quickly, or you can at least replicate that data and make it available in lots of different ways. We also showed off, it's probably finished by now, I can check it out. We showed off how you can go in and move sort of your users closer to the data. And we're really, I shouldn't say move, that's not really what's happening. It's using logic to decide how you route traffic. So if I come in from one part of the world, maybe you don't send me to Australia for that data, maybe you send me over here because that's closer to where I am. We talked about how you can go in and see data sort of post problem. You know, somebody's told us we had a 500 error. I didn't know about it, but real easily I can go in and see, oh yeah, there's a 500 error. It's happened this many times. Oh, and it's on line 66 of this particular file that's associated with our product service. All I have to do is go reach out in Teams or Slack to our development team and say, hey, we just discovered a bug. It's pretty simple. It's just a divide by zero thing. Maybe make that change, go ahead and do a pull request, let's build this thing again, let's put it out there, and we can actually solve that like probably within a few minutes or maybe an hour, rather than having to wait until like next month's release. We can actually just push this fix out really quickly because we caught it really quickly. And if you want to take more of a proactive approach and you want to see things in real time, we can just use live stream, and you saw like almost instantaneously, I recreated that problem, and over in live stream, it had the 500 error, and I can dig in from there. So those are kind of the highlights, and those are the things I wanted to show you. At the end of the day, what we're doing is we're trying to create a more observable system. We're trying to understand what is it like for the end user. Because I could say that I had all of my bases covered. I'm monitoring my CPUs. I'm monitoring for all kinds of things. The things that we historically, as operations and system administrator people, those are the things that we cared about because we had to keep those systems up and running so that the applications were running. The world has changed, and especially with the cloud, that kind of stuff just isn't as important because we can go out and get these resources dynamically. We can containerize applications, and we can use things like Kubernetes to like scale up and scale down almost like in massive proportions very quickly. So the resources are something that we pay attention to, but in a different way, which frees us up to start looking at what it's like for the user. Because at the end of the day, if they come in and they're trying to use our application, and we're using Azure and all the bells and whistles, and we got Cosmos, and we got data replicated, if they come in and try to use our application and it's just not a good experience, they're gonna bounce. They're gonna go on to the next provider. They're gonna find somebody else who's providing a better experience. They're gonna find somebody who, it doesn't take me 15 seconds to log into my bank and then another minute and a half to like pay a bill. Like, this is something I wanna be able to do on the fly from my phone at the airport. And if you can't provide that to me, the value that I want, I'm gonna go to a different bank. So that right there means we have to stop thinking about monitoring our applications and our infrastructures solely at the component level. It's not about the tech breaking. It's about our users being unhappy because they're not getting the value that we promised them. And that's as simple as I can really put it. With that, I got a few more things I want to share with you. We've been, on the advocacy team, we've been really focusing on adding more content, more relevant, new, up-to-date content. And one of the things that we're building, which I personally love, and I can't wait to build my first course, is called Microsoft Learn. It's actually part of Docs. If you've been into docs.microsoft.com, you'll see a little indicator about Learn up in the corner. And what it is, it's a free training sort of playground where you can go in and in a lot of the courses, you'll set up a sandbox account that's free and automatically be able to sort of log in and play with a lot of stuff in Azure. And we've even got an SRE course in there where you can just sort of learn about the basics of SRE. But there's all kinds of courses you can go in there. It's gamified, so as you go through it and you eventually take the quiz at the end, you're told whether or not you were successful, and you get these points, and you kind of move on and take different things. It's real simple and easy, fun way to learn a bunch of stuff about what Microsoft is building. So I encourage you to go check out Microsoft Learn. There's a link for you. And then I've already kind of mentioned these, but tomorrow I've got 2 more talks, a little bit more grounded in site reliability engineering, so I'll really spend some time in both those talks making sure we understand what that means. What do I mean when I say SRE or site reliability engineering? And in the first one, it'll be more about monitoring and alerting, doing actionable alerting. We don't want to page anybody if they can't do anything about it. We don't want to page somebody and not give them information so they know what to do. So there's some things that we'll talk about there. And then SRE 30 is sort of the next part of that story, the continuation of what happens after we've detected an issue and we've sent an actionable alert to our first responder. What do they do? And I think that's one area that I'm discovering is a real scary scenario for a lot of people that are moving into the cloud. We understood our on-prem services. We understood how things worked in our data center. Now you put it into the cloud, and there's this new abstraction layer. And we're not really sure, or at least not fully confident, on how do we go in and figure out what's wrong when things go wrong. Because they will. They're always going to go wrong. We've all been in IT and in tech in general long enough to know that failure is just part of the job. It happens. So what do you do when it happens? So that's what that talk's going to be about, is actually trying to understand. We'll show you some different tools, a few of the same things I covered today, but in a different way. And then as far as next steps, these are the things I would love for you to do. You can go and you can get all of the sessions, not just the one that I'm delivering or the 3 that I'm delivering, but you can go get all the sessions and the presentations, all the code. You can replicate this entire environment as well as all the other talks that you've seen. And then there's a repository. You can go and clone that down. And then also, if you're on Twitter, I love making friends on Twitter. I spend a lot of time on there, sort of engaging with conversations of both customers and people who have questions and other people who are active sort of in the community. So if you're on Twitter, let's hook up there. Would love to engage and have conversation. Ask me any question. Feel free to send me questions on Twitter. You can send me DMs. Send me questions to my email. I'm just jason.hand@microsoft.com if you have any questions there. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming. I hope I've appreciated it. I hope you enjoyed this talk. And I think it's time for lunch. So anyway, I appreciate it, and thank you so much for coming.